today's end-to-end testing. We did previously some integration testing using Jest and testing library, which is pretty cool stuff. Kind of hard in some respects, especially finding things on the screen using get by, query by, find by, and then all these different things of setting things on the screen. This is a much easier topic using end-to-end testing with Cypress. We'll talk about end-to-end testing, of course, and we'll compare Jest and Cypress. Completely different types of testing and the way we do our testing. And then we'll go ahead and we'll install and configure Cypress, and we're going to write some end-to-end tests. And we'll talk about some cool stuff like how to intercept network requests and use fixture data and other things as well. So of course, end-to-end testing, we've already done integration testing and unit testing. And that is generally when you have the source code. So integration and unit testing, you usually have the code. You have the code, the source code to the thing that you are testing. Otherwise, you couldn't run Jest, could you? Because it relies on you having the code. And we used Jest as our end-to-end or our integration unit testing, or we could use Mocha. Mocha also works with testing library. We could use that as well, but we chose to use Jest only because it was also written by Facebook. So people tend to gravitate towards using Jest for doing React testing. All right. Well, we also have end-to-end testing. It's oftentimes referred to as E to E or A to Z or A to Z testing. And this is where you test the entire application. And you test it just like a user would use it. So a user, of course, wouldn't do unit tests on a function. They don't even know functions exist. All they see is what they see on their screen. And we have a little app here that we're going to test. This little album search app. I think they use this as an example in some data fetching. So we're going to test this little album search app, slightly modified version of it. This will be our test program for today. So just like a user, you interact with the application just like a user. And what's the difference between black box and E to E? Well, black boxes means you can't see what's going on inside. So one could argue we are testing a black box. We are testing we just see the outside of the box, or we just see the outside of this application. But end-to-end testing is all the functions of the app completely assembled. So it's complete. The app is complete. It's built. It is done. It is virtually ready to ship or ready to go to production. And end-to-end testing is usually done before we release the final product. And the reason for that is it is slower. Something like Jest, although it takes a couple seconds to fire up, it can do tests really quick, just 1, 2, 3, 4, in milliseconds. Jest can run your tests. But end-to-end testing, because it is interacting with the screen, it's clicking on buttons and typing things into inputs. It is by definition going to be slower because it's visual. It is a graphical interface. All right. So end-to-end testing, it's a fun topic. I'm actually involved with one right now. We're doing end-to-end testing. We're actually replacing or replatforming an application that's been running for many, many years. Gosh, over 20 odd years or 30 years, I think this thing's running. It predates me. And we want to finally replace it. It's running on these old aging servers that nobody can make work. And it's critical. It's one of those things. If it goes down, it makes the 6 o'clock news. It's that big a system. Anyway, so we want to know that is the new system we're going to put in place going to behave exactly the same as the old one? We're not changing any code really, just moving it to a new server and minor changes. So we want to confirm if what we have now is what we have in the new state. So that's a great candidate for something like end-to-end testing, because we don't really want to even get into the code of this old system. Nobody does. But something like end-to-end, using the tool we're going to use is Cypress, is a perfect choice. So we're using Cypress, which is spelled like this. It's like Cypress Mountain, the ski mountain. I named that there. Cypress. And versus Jest. Because Jest, of course, is command line based. NPM test, it runs your Jest tests, and you build those Jest tests in VS Code. And you don't really see what they're doing. You just can do dumping of the DOM. You do things like debug or pretty DOM. Remember that one as well? You can dump out the DOM, but you can't really visually see what's happening. Whereas Cypress, it's all visual. We design our tests. We still write them in VS Code, but we design them and review them on a visual dashboard. Has anybody started their Cypress exercises yet in Compass and got around to installing Cypress? We'll talk about that in a second, how that works. But you'll probably know it's very visual when you see it. Okay. But it is slower, of course, by definition, because you're interacting with a web page, you're typing. In fact, you may be typing at human speed. You may have told your tests, type at this particular speed to see how the application responds to someone typing at this particular speed. Things you can't do in something like Jest. Okay. Let's go ahead and we'll jump into Cypress because that's fun. As I mentioned earlier, for those who just joined us, I'm currently out of town, staying in a hotel room right by the runway of this airport. And I could just see planes. You'll hear them in a couple seconds. So I've got a different setup on my desk here. Okay. So there we go. There's my application, my thing. And now the fun thing is when you use Cypress, now I've got this project here. I've got the code for this little app right here. And this may not be the case. I happen to have the code, but I might not have the code. So you don't even have to have the source code of the application you're testing to test the application. I just happen to have it. So I could really, if I wanted to, make myself a whole new NPM project and only put my Cypress test in it. Maybe I'd call it album search tests or album search Cypress and put everything in there. Now today I'm going to include everything in my project. I'm going to bundle it up with my code, but that might not always be the case. I'm doing it because I have it here, but quite often you would have a separate repo, a separate GitHub project, and npm package.json just for doing this. Okay. So let's go ahead. In fact, let's take a look at Cypress. Let's take a look here. Let's pull it up. There it is. Cypress testing. Cypress Mountain always comes up first. I have no idea why. Testing. The web has evolved. Finally, testing has too. Well, that's actually a pretty true statement. Okay, so Cypress is, you'll notice right at the beginning, a very, very well-documented system. Their website is really, really good. Their documentation is amazing, very well documented. This site, I've never seen better documentation in any tool that I've ever used. It's just really amazing. You can count the number of times I say Cypress is awesome today. It'll be a big number, I'm sure. So how to get started? Well, npm install Cypress. Okay, and you click on that. Of course, it copies to clipboard. Look at that. Little touches like that. I love the documentation. It does such a great job of documenting Cypress. Now, commonly we do it this way. There is a standalone Cypress you can download and run as an application. We're going to run it as npm because it's what we are familiar with, and it's quite easy in our case. So we'll install it this way. Okay, and that's how it works. And take a look, and it shows you how to do your tests. Okay. And the docs are fantastic. Let's go into here. We're going to documentation, and we'll say getting started installing Cypress. There. Okay. npm install. Sounds good. And they even show you, in case you're not clear what happens when you type npm install, it shows you a video of how that works. How great is that? Really well-documented site. It's fantastic. Okay. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to install Cypress and bring up the Cypress console. Let's go ahead and do that right now. There. So a couple of ways to do that. So what we want to do is we want to install our Cypress as a dev dependency. So now I believe in Compass, it says to install with a -G. I think it gives us this. Let me copy and paste this. I think Compass says that we should do, whoops, that. Don't do that. Don't install Cypress with -G. First off, it's pointless because Cypress is installed on your home profile anyway, and a -G tends to mess up your node. So instead of doing this, we're going to install it as a dev dependency, minus save dash dev like this. We're going to use version 9.7 because I'm pretty sure the Compass version we're using is 9.7. The latest version of Cypress is something like 13. And they did have a fairly major change in the user interface and some of the other file naming conventions after version 10.11. So we're going to stick with 9.7 today. The tests all look the same. There's virtually no difference in the way the tests work. So please make sure you install 9.7 because otherwise it'll look totally different. And the Compass work really won't make much sense, I'm afraid. So let's go ahead and do that. Save dev. There we go. It does download Cypress. It'll do some npm stuff, then it'll pause for a long time. And you'll think it's broken. It's not. It's actually downloading Cypress. Now, I've done that, so mine's going to bypass that really long pause. It'll just finish that part. So it does the npm stuff, and in your case, it'll probably just pause right after this. It didn't here, and it ends. And I'm in. Okay. And it's gone ahead and installed Cypress for me in my project. Okay. And to make it work, I have to go to my package.json, and we're going to add a script to our scripts and add one here. There. This is by far the easiest way to start Cypress using npm. Let's make a script. I'll call it Cypress. There. And I'm just going to say Cypress open, just like that. And that'll start Cypress in graphical mode or in the UI mode. It's an interactive graphics. Okay. Now for those of you that are running like me, Windows using WSL2, there's one little step you have to add. Don't forget this because it's not going to work otherwise. Okay. You have to make sure you set your display. It's easy. We just go export display equals :0. That's it. That's all you have to do. If it's anything but that, it's not going to work. You probably have a slightly different export in your setup. So make sure you do that. Export display equals :0. So export display equals :0, and you're all good. Those running Macs, you don't have to because you're running Cypress on your hard Mac, whereas WSL is a VM, and we have to allow this display. That's it. Okay. Then I can start my Cypress. npm run Cypress. I hit enter. Okay, what's going to happen? You get a bunch of stuff that comes up, usually. It looks like error messages. It's actually not, but it does. Yeah, like what's with that? No idea why it does that. It always does that. You can ignore that safely. It comes up and you get, minimize that. So now no more command line. It's all done from here. Okay. All right. Now, what it creates for you, it actually creates for you a few things. There. We've created some sample test files for you. And if you look at my project over here, it indeed has created a Cypress directory in this project and a couple other files, a cypress.json file, which is totally empty right now. Okay. So, and a few files, and it created some test files in this folder called integration. And it shows me them here. This is the console. Keep this window small. Don't maximize this window. It's not needed. Make it like really small. You don't need to see this window that much. Okay. So yeah, we've made some files for you that you can use and some example test specs. Now this is version 9 of Cypress. They called their test files spec files. Why did they call them spec files? Your guess is as good as mine. They didn't call them test files. They called them spec files. And they looked like this, todo.spec.js. And there it is, todo.spec.js. Now, why on earth would they call it .spec? Why not .test? Like, it's a test file. Why is it not called .spec.js? Who can think of why that might be the case? Why would they not have called it .test.js? Anybody remember? We do other kinds of testing using Jest, don't we? What does Jest do? It looks for files with .test, doesn't it? .js. So if we had both Jest tests and Cypress tests in our project, we ran our Jest test, what's going to happen? It's going to try to run all of our Cypress tests and probably crash. And then Cypress, the same thing. They'll step all over each other. We don't want that. So they picked a different name, .spec. Fun fact, the later version of Cypress changed that to .sci. Huh, go figure. .sci. Okay. And sorry, I'm missing the chat. You're right. To start this, we added a script to our package.json. I call it Cypress open. Sorry, I don't quite notice the chat all the time. Okay. Okay, so this is our initial Cypress console. We don't use this console that much, by the way, only just to start our tests. It shows all the tests we have, like this. And it gives us a bunch of sample tests. We're not going to use any of these, but just for fun, we're going to open one test. Let's open a test. Let's click on that test. So I'm going to run this particular test or this test suite. There we go. This is what we're interested in. This is the Cypress window comes up. My laptop's a little slower today, but there, loading my test. What's it going to do? It's the first time this morning, so just take a, there we go. So what Cypress does, it actually instantiates a browser for me. There we go. It pulls up a browser, its own browser, and then does stuff on that browser. There, now it's interacting with that site. That's not me. My hands are here. See, that's Cypress doing all this stuff, typing in a screen, clicking on the box. Isn't that cool? Like a little robot doing all your tests for you. That's awesome. There, it's done. I can't tell. Nope, it's still going. There we go. I think it's finished. It is. Okay, so it ran all these tests inside this test suite. And it ran them graphically. As you can see, it actually pulls up a browser. It has its own browser. This is called Electron. That's an embedded browser that anybody can use in their projects. But you can tell Cypress to use another browser if you want. And people oftentimes do. They oftentimes pick Electron, which uses Chrome, or you can use Firefox or anything you have installed. Okay. So as you can see, it runs the tests. Now this, although it's fairly quick, it's compared to Jest, it's quite slow because it's typing stuff in. It's clicking on boxes, just like a person, and it runs them interactively or in the browser. And that's how Cypress works. Let's go ahead and do our own tests. Let's close this one. There we go. Okay, I'm going to kill these tests. Now it does say, little thing pops up. It says, yeah, just delete these sample files. I'm going to click this. Makes my life easy. One thing about Cypress is they've made things really easy. It was written by developers for developers. So they've thought of all these things. So yeah, when I clear out all those files it gave me, I could go into VS Code and delete them, but that's kind of hard. So instead, I'm going to, no thanks, delete these sample files. So delete those files. Yes, delete the files. And they're all gone. And now I have no tests. It's a little thing, but it's nice. By the way, it will say there's a new version at the bottom. Please don't be tempted. Do not be tempted to click on the Upgrade Cypress button. You'll regret it because everything changes. The versions are much different. 9 was actually a great version. It was nice and compact and easy to use, which is why we chose it for this course, because it gets a bit overwhelming with later versions of Cypress. Same concepts, but version 9.7 is a great one to start with when you're just learning Cypress. No files found. Okay, so let's go ahead and make ourselves a test file. We put them in this folder called integration. A bunch of folders here. We'll look at some of them. Fixtures just contains, well, fixtures, fixed data. Much like we did in our Axios file, we had some mock data. That's fixture data. It's mock data. We'll talk about that later. All tests go in this folder called integration. Why is it not called test? Well, the same reason, because it might interfere with our other tests. To make a file. There. I'm going to make a file called my first test. So make a file right here. I'm going to number them 1. Oh, come on. I'm going to give them a number, 1 dash, only so I can see them in order. I want to call it first. I can't call it test. I'll call it spec.js, or in later versions, .sci. I like sci better. The later versions have .sci. Same thing, files look the same, so we're going to call them .spec.js. My first test. Did the console notice that? It did. It noticed I now have a test that doesn't do anything. And clearly it doesn't do anything, does it? Okay, so now what do Cypress tests look like? We've done Mocha tests. We've done Jest tests. Well, now we have to learn a whole new way of doing tests. So what on earth would a Cypress test look like? Well, it turns out they look exactly the same with a describe block, just like this. Describe, and we can say, we'll call this tests to see if Cypress is working. There, that's a nice initial test. So they look really exactly the same as every other test. And this is on purpose. Tests have been kind of standardized to use this describe and it format, so they all do it the same way. It just makes the bar lower for being able to use the testing. And it has an it. Okay, it, I will just say can run. It doesn't matter what we call it. I'm going to make a very simple test or an assertion. Okay, so there's a test, and I'll do an assertion. Assert there, and I'll say dot equal. I'll do an assert equal true true. A simple assertion, and I think it's pretty safe that true is true. There's a test. Let's run this test. Now in Cypress, we go to the console. It's noticed my test is here. Let's open up our spec. And now we get the larger window. This is why we keep that console small, because we don't need it. It's really not a main window. This is the one we care about. My test is starting. It is a little slow because of where I am here. Well, I got a passing test. Nothing on the browser because I didn't do anything in a browser. So it didn't do anything. But there's my test. My test passed, and it shows me the result of my test. Now, even this is nicer than Jest. Like, this is nice. Here's my test, and it passed. Okay. What does a failing test look like? Well, same thing. We'll go ahead and we'll say we expect to be false. There. You notice it also notices that our test changed and it runs again, just like just running in watch mode. So there's a failing test, not as overwhelming as a failing jest test. But test failed, expect true to be false. Okay, it's not so bad. I'm not feeling too bad about myself. Okay, let's make that test true again. Let's do another simple test. We're going to do something a little more realistic. We're going to visit a web page. Have Cypress open up a web page, right? And remember, like every other test, it's all about assertions, right? Testing is all about assertions. Question in chat, what about the first test rule? First fail rule? That's exactly right. All testing is about assertions. And if an assertion fails, the test fails. That's how all tests work. If an assertion fails, that test will fail and that test will not continue. So we can say the first fail, correct. But it's more, think about it in terms of assertions. If an assertion fails, it stops that test. Make another one. Again, it here and it there. We'll say can visit a web page. Okay. So Cypress commands, how to do things in Cypress. They all start with Cy. That's so cute. Cy dot something. So how do I visit a web page in Cypress? Well, one thing about Cypress is it is very, very easy to use. It made it very intuitive. So who wants to guess what command Cypress used to visit a web page? And of course, I'm giving it away, aren't I? Of course, it's visit. Yes, visit. Yes, Cy dot visit. And let's take a look. Let's go to Cypress. And here's their site. Let's click on here. By the way, amazing search feature. Look at this, huh? Let's look for visit. Visit. There we go. How to visit a page. And look at this. Just for that one command, they provide just a whole bunch of documentation. Very top, how to use visit. Cy.visit, give it a URL. Can't get any easier than that. Or alternatively, with some options. We'll do this first one because that's kind of the easiest one. So cy.visit URL. And here's the correct usage. The Cypress documentation does always show this, the syntax, and then the usage, how you would use it in your test. It shows correct examples, and in some cases, it'll show you common incorrect examples, which is really awesome. There's no incorrect way to use cy.visit here, which is why they haven't got incorrect, but other ones we'll look at will have incorrect usages or common mistakes people make. So cy.visit, look at that. Pick a web page. Let's go to our site. We have this little app. Where'd it go? Right here. This is running on localhost 8765. Okay, let's visit the site. I've got to open my browser. Let's see if Cypress can open this as well. So go to my test, cy.visit, and we go to our website, which is http:// and it was localhost 8765. Okay. Localhost 8765. I'm sure I've typed that wrong, but we'll give it a try. There. Let's watch what happens. Let's go to my site. I'm excited. Let's go to my test. Okay. Notice that changed. It's doing something. Mine's a little slower. I've got a slower data connection today, which is why it seems a little slower than normal. So, well, that seemed to work. There. Went to my page, and there it is in the browser, just like I'm showing in my my browser here. And I can check, and it says, there's my visit. There. Okay. We'll talk about this a little later, but it shows you each step of what happened in your page. and it renders a browser for you. You can view what's going on in your test. And by the way, this is a live browser. I can actually click on here there or type. See, it's live. It's not just view only. This is a live browser you can interact with. Okay. So apparently I can visit a web page using Cypress. Let's make some adjustments to our page because this isn't quite sized the way I like it. We can alter our tests to change things, such as right now it's rendering in, it says 1000 by 660. Can I change that? Let's click on that. I can. Look at this. It's great. Just click on there. You can change the viewport to something else. Right now it's set to this. Let's copy that. Let's make it something else. Let's copy that. And it says edit the cypress.json file. Sure enough, I have a file called cypress.json. There it is. Let's put that there. But let's change it to something else. What's a good resolution? I'm going to make mine 1280 by 800 maybe. See what that looks like. What the heck? Let's go 1280 by 800. I want to see how the app behaves in this resolution. There. And this Cypress JSON, you would have a number of these. For a test, you might plug in a different Cypress.json file and run your tests again. That's why it's a separate file. You can then inject this file into your test and run your test under different scenarios, such as this kind of monitor. Now we'll test with a 640 by 480 monitor, if you can imagine one of those being around anymore. Monitor from the 80s being around, or 8 by 6 or some other resolution. So we'll try it in this. Now what's going to happen here? Let's go back to my test. And what happened? What did Cypress do? Oh, my test disappeared. It's gone. Huh. What Cypress did, of course, it detected that you made an underlying configuration change. It noticed that. So it had to reload your tests, right? Let's just reload this again. Runs tests. There. Because we changed our Cypress JSON, it had to close our tests because it has to render things differently. So we'll run it again. Open up again, and now it's going to be a different resolution browser when it comes up. Take a look. I am using a different laptop today, which is why it is a little slower today. Let me know if my audio gets a little wonky as well. Okay. The question is, can we have two different viewports at the same time? Not really. We'd only test with one, but you certainly can maintain two different Cypress.jsons and then run them in an automated test environment. Okay, so there we go. Looks different to me, I guess. So a little different size, a little more screen on there. I can resize this as well to see what my page looks like. Okay, so that's Cypress. All right, so let's do something else. What we're going to do here is make another test. Let's test something about our application. So where's I'll pull up my here. I want to test this application. Now in end-to-end testing, you're testing the user experience, aren't you? So in this app, you can of course type something, maybe Bee Gees. I heard that was a band back from the 18th century or something. Okay. All right. And I can filter things. I can say, filter out any explicit. I would doubt the Bee Gees had anything explicit in their albums back in those days. But if I check this checkbox, it becomes unchecked. So it changes state when I check it. I want to know, does it change state? Does it behave like it's supposed to? If you click on a checkbox, does it actually change state? Like that. And you may ask yourself, well, why would you want to test that? Well, the checkbox may be disabled. And in my application, it shouldn't be disabled in this state. So I want to test, is this checkbox enabled? Can someone check and uncheck that checkbox? Seems like a very simple, silly test, but test it for all those things. You test the smallest little detailed questions about the UI. Because if not you, who's going to ask that question? So as the tester, we test these things. Testing, I mentioned in the Discord chat, that's a career. You can be a test engineer or a test developer. It's a cool job. These are people that they spend their days writing tests to break things as opposed to make them work. It's great because you are evaluated on how many bugs you find. Whereas as a coder, I guess we're evaluating how few bugs we make. Testers love to find bugs and they write diabolical tests trying to find bugs and make your code break. It's a fun job. I do this all day, really. If I could do Cypress all day long, I certainly would because it's really fun. So we ask these really fussy little questions like, why'd you test that? I have developers coming to me when I write tests, back when I used to write tests, and they say, I said, broke. Why'd you test that? I didn't think you'd test that kind of thing. Well, of course I tested it. It was part of the application. Didn't think I tested, did you? And it broke. Had to fix it. So we test every little thing about the application, things you wouldn't even think of as a developer. So does a checkbox change state when you click on it? Who thought of that? Okay, let's write that test. I'm going to make another file here. We'll call it, there, oops, integration. Make a test, call it 2-checkbox dot spec dot js. And there's our checkbox test. I'm sure I spelled incorrectly. Looks close. Okay, same thing. Describe. And we'll say tests for the filters. These were filter checkboxes. There. They have my suite. This is a suite of tests, so it's called, that's our suite title. And we'll say, okay, so let's make a simple test for our checkbox. I'm going to say, I'm going to visit the site, and it's going to be can uncheck the explicit checkbox. So it should be unchecked when I click on it. So that's my it. So it can uncheck the explicit checkbox. There, okay. So the first thing I want to do in my test is I want to visit the site, as always. So step number one, I'm going to visit the site. So sci dot visit. Okay, and it'll be the same thing. Did I copy that? No, I didn't. Okay, I'm going to copy and paste. Always gets me in trouble. Let's grab our line here. Step number one. Now, when I build tests, I build them incrementally. I'm going to stop here. I'm going to run the test. I'm going to run the test and watch what it does every time I change a line of my test to make sure it always runs. So go to my test console, which is here, and it's notice I have a test. Let's open up this test. It is kind of slow. I'm using a different laptop today, so it's not as fast as I'd like, that's for sure. Okay. Open to the browser and visit the site. Can I visit the site? Okay. There. So far it's passing. Remember, tests are all about assertions. What does that mean? Assertions. Well, if something fails, and in Cypress, much like in Jest, remember testing library? They were self-asserting. If you couldn't do a get on something, that was an assertion. So a Cypress, it's the same thing. If you can't get something, that will assert. So if I gave it a different URL that didn't exist, maybe something like that, my test will run and it will assert. It will wait a second, then, yeah, couldn't find it. So it's a self-asserting. There is not a lot of assert messages that we use in Cypress because almost everything is self-asserting. We might do something at the very end saying the text should be there, but everything else is self-asserting. So change that back, and it should find my site again. And it does. Okay. So now I want to find that checkbox. We did this in jest, right? Using testing library, we do a probably get by role, for instance, to find a checkbox. Those were hard. It's much easier in Cypress. Cypress uses syntax sci.get to find things. And how do we use a sci.get? Let's take a look. Look for get. Sci.get. There. Okay. The syntax sci.get. Okay. With a selector. The most common way to sci.get is with a selector. Can you remember that term? We've heard that term before back in jQuery, remember? Selector. Turns out it's just like jQuery. Just like dollar. It's like the dollar function in jQuery. You can find things just the same as jQuery. In fact, under the covers, Cypress uses a jQuery engine to do some things. Okay, so a CSS selector just like jQuery. So I can get anything I want. I can get a button, get by role, pound for ID, dot for class, the same as in jQuery. So I'm liking this better already. Isn't this great? Just finding stuff. I love jQuery. It was so easy to find things. Cypress is much easier to use to find things. So I'll find out what to get. Well, what have I got here? Well, I've got these inputs. They look like checkboxes. So I want to find out what they really are. I'm gonna quickly do an inspect. What are these things? Let's do an inspect. What can I find here? Sometimes you have to look at the DOM, sometimes not. Now here, it's pretty clear these are checkbox inputs or inputs with a type of checkbox. You have to know a little bit about HTML. You can't be totally unaware of content. Go inspect that. Okay. Oh, it's my a little wider. There we go. Okay. So it's an input. Make it slightly bigger too. There we go. It is an input with a type of checkbox. There we go. Input type checkbox. Okay. It also has a class of filtered underscore checkbox. So a couple things I could do. I could do a search for dot filters checkbox. That'd work. Or maybe search for input. I've got more than one input though. Maybe input with a type of checkbox. So I have a number of choices, just like we do in jQuery. I don't know, I'm going to try, maybe I'll look for the form first, and then find some stuff inside that. Let's try that. So I have a number of different choices for ways I can find things, okay? I'm going to try the easiest one, try to find inputs with type of checkbox. See if that works. So sci.get, I'm going to look for, first off, input. Can I find any inputs? I'm going to stop here. What does it find for me? Let's take a look. Go to my Cypress test. What did it find? Okay. Did it find any inputs? Okay, well, let's see what happened here. Here's my test. Visit the site, and well, look at that. It found some. If I hover over that, it shows me what it found. You can click on each one of these and it will show, or just hover as well. Okay, I've got it pinned. I can unpin it there and just hover over it. It shows the steps of the test, each step of the way. There's my visit, there's my get. Okay, so it found 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 inputs. I don't want that one. I want these 5 there. I want the one that has explicit, but I'm getting close. Okay, so maybe I can narrow down the search. I can say type. This is all, by the way, this is all CSS selectors. This is not Cypress. This is just CSS now. Just like jQuery with CSS, I can go type. equals, and I'll say checkbox. I have to use different quotes, single quotes here, double quotes here, because I can't use double quotes in both. Okay, so now it's going to find all the inputs with type of checkbox. Let's go back and see what it found. Let's take a look. Well, no red, so it must have found my input. So, much better. It found all of these. Okay, so it did find all of my inputs of type checkbox. And now I just want to get the first one of those. Well, it's easy in Cypress. I would just simply say first. Get the first one. There we go. So dot first. Looks exactly like jQuery, doesn't it? Dot first, dot parent, dot children. DOM navigation is identical to that of jQuery. And there's my test. So let's step through our test now. Visit the site, get 5 of them, get the first. Yes. Now I can do something to it. I want to uncheck that checkbox. Okay. Who wants to guess what command or action Cypress chose to uncheck a checkbox? I know I'm giving it away, aren't I? It's uncheck. So uncheck. There. Uncheck the checkbox. Let's take a look. Running my test. Okay, there's test. Get the 5, get the first, and uncheck it. I hover. You know, this is flashing back and forth. It's showing me the before and the after. Let's click on this and freeze it. Before the check, it's kind of hard to see. After check. So before the action, so any action you perform in Cypress, it gives you before and after. Before the action and after the action. There. I know it's kind of hard to see because that red dot in there, but it is unchecking it. How cool is that? Okay. All right. So did that work? So we did check it. Now, this is self-asserting. What if I tried to check something that couldn't do a check? For instance, let's take out that first. It's going to find all of my inputs, but it's going to grab this one now, isn't it? Let's take out that first. Okay. And let's just uncheck them all. See what happens. What's it going to do? Or maybe this. Yeah, let's get all the inputs. There. We'll get the first input, but now it's going to grab this one and try to uncheck something that's not a checkbox. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, so get my visit, get input, get the first. Oh, I see my mistake in my code. And then I tried to uncheck something that could not be unchecked. It wasn't a checkbox. And it tells you, look at this. Uncheck can only be called on a checkbox. Of course, you try to check an input. What are you doing? So it's very helpful and very intuitive in the way it works. So clearly my test failed for that reason. So it tells what to do. So what I need to do, of course, is change my code to only get those type checkbox. Run it again, and Cypress is happy. Okay, now I want to find out, well, is this thing actually unchecked? Did it work? Because you can click a checkbox, but did it uncheck the checkbox? And this is where we're going to add an assertion at the very end. I'm going to add a should. Dot should. And looks like this. Should not be checked. There. Very natural language. Should not be checked. So after all this, it should not be checked. Let's run our test. And this now is a complete test with a little assertion at the end just to confirm that things look like they are supposed to look like. And yeah, there's my test. There's my get. There's my get all my inputs. There's my first. There's my uncheck, before and after, and my assertion. a complete test. Now, we've gone through this in very slow detail, I know, but all tests kind of have the same format. You load the application, you find something on the page that you want to interact with, you then interact with that thing, and then you watch what happened. And all along the way, these are assertions. It should have had a checkbox. If it couldn't find any checkboxes, it would have failed. If it couldn't find a first checkbox, it would have failed. Okay. And at the end, I simply said, is this thing unchecked? Let's add one more test. It'll be very similar. What we do now is we want to, that EP on the right here, we want to now be able to click on this EP, there it is right there, and go from unchecked to checked. So what I want to do, now of course I could go last, but I'm going to do a different way. I'm going to do a direct lookup. I'm going to go here, inspect that one, and that one has an ID. Okay. Okay. But what I want to do is, instead of clicking on the checkbox itself, what if you check on the text? Because on something like a phone, those can be really small checkboxes and hard to get with your fingers. So it's also said if you check on the text beside the checkbox, it also will check and uncheck it. And that's what I want to test now. If someone checks on it, the question is, should it be a click? Well, a click does work too, but I can also click on something else. And I want to have it assert if it wasn't even a checkbox. I said, get the inputs, checkboxes. If we couldn't find a first, so I want to make sure it's checkbox. You're right, a click would also work, and stay tuned. We're doing that in a couple seconds here. So I want to find not the input itself, I want to find the text beside it. Okay, so right now, I can see beside this checkbox, there is a label which contains the text EP. Okay, so there's another way to search for things. We can do a get using a CSS or jQuery selector. We can do another way of searching for things. We can do what's called contains. Let's go to Cypress. There, contains. There. You can say dot contains, and you can use it both ways, either contains by itself or sci dot contains standalone. They do talk about this. There's some commands you can use standalone. In other words, sci being the top, or chain is something else. We're going to go with a sci dot contains. Okay. I want to find something that contains some content. We're going to say, there's our visit, and we're going to say sci dot contains. There. And contains what? Well, I want to say contains EP. I know it's hard to see there. Let's go back to my browser. But it does contain EP. So find something on the screen that contains EP. Contains means it is contained within the open and close pointy bracket. It's the content of that element. So contains EP. So contains EP. Let's stop there. Let's watch what happens. Incremental testing, right? Let's take a look. So it's going to try to find something that contains EP. Seemed to work. Of course, it ran both my tests, my first test and my second. Just like with Jest, we can do it dot only in our tests. And we often do this. When you want to only focus on one test, I'm going to run just this test, which makes my life a little faster. And now it just runs the one test, and it did find something that contains EP, and there it is. It is text that contains, or an element that contains EP. Okay. And now, what action do I want to perform on this element? Well, I want to click it, don't I? So as was pointed out earlier, I just do a click. So we'll do a dot click, just like that. We're going to click it. There. Let's take a look. Let's go back, let our test run. And it's going to click at EP. Okay, my test, let's hover over that and watch before and after. There we go. Before and after, alternating back and forth. Look at that. So it found it and I clicked it. Now, a click never fails because we can click anywhere. So you can't really have a self-asserting click because you can pretty much click on anything. So it's not really great for doing a self-assertion. But what I want to know now is, sure, I can click on it. That's fine, but I can click on anything. Did that change something? Did it make that checkbox change state? So now we need to find this thing again. I need to find the checkbox. Now I can't go, this should be unchecked. I can't say should be unchecked because this is a label. A label can't be unchecked. Only a checkbox can. So I can't do this. I still have to find that checkbox. So another sci.get, sci.get. But I also have to know that this particular checkbox had an ID of EP. So I'll just say hash or pound EP, a little faster than doing it this way. Let's take a look. Will it find my checkbox using pound EP? And it does, and it found the checkbox. And this should now be checked. So I'll say dot should be checked. Oops. There. There's my test. That's how this test works. And it worked. Okay. Very simple tests. Finding things different ways. Let's do one quick thing before the break. You may have noticed in my test here, this is kind of inefficient, isn't it? I've got these two tests, but they're both doing the same visit and visit, aren't they? This should probably be a candidate for pulling it out into some kind of function or encapsulating this into more reasonable code. So what I can do here is I can add a before each section to my test. Before each. There. Looks like this. So this will run before each test. And let's pull out our visit. Let's just grab this. So before each test, we're going to actually pull out our visit. Just like that. There. So now this will happen before each of our tests. There. Okay. Is that going to work? Let's see what happens here. It still visits my site, and they all ran. Look at my test. It says now, there's my before each. Pretty great, huh? It tells you what's happening. Here's your before each. In the before each, it visits the site, and then it ran your test. So this is very common, having a before each. But you may also say, well, it still doesn't look great because I have this hard-coded URL in here. What if I want to test another site and I've got like 1,000 of these test files? Do I have to change each one of those spec files and edit this URL? And I guess, yeah, you'd have to. But there's a way around that. What we can do is we can define a global parameter as our base URL. Just grab this and we're going to save this. And you probably guess it's going to be in our Cypress.json file. That's exactly where it goes. For Cypress.json, we're going to change this. We're going to add something called a base URL. Base URL. There. And make it this. So for all of our tests, if they don't specify an absolute or what's called a fully qualified URL, which means it has HTTP and stuff in it, then add this on front of it. So now I can change my tests. Be a little simpler. I can say visit slash. Much easier. And now this test is now portable. Depending on what Cypress.json file you inject in, it'll still work. Let's make sure this thing still works. And my test has, of course, disappeared because Cypress said, hey, you changed the main setting. I closed all my tests. Let's go back here and make sure our page still loads with our new portable base URL. It's a good sign, hasn't stopped yet. There we go. So it is working. It's doing exactly what we want, but now it's portable. Okay. One really quick last thing before we take a break. You may have noticed there is a delay, isn't there, between this visit and this stuff? Isn't that asynchronous? Like, clearly there was a huge delay, certainly on my machine, hotel room here, between the time it took the visit to be requested and have it finished. It was a couple seconds the first time it ran. That's clearly asynchronous, but I didn't do any kind of promise or wait or anything. So it turns out everything in Cypress, it waits. It just waits for you. Don't even worry about it. You don't have to worry about things happening asynchronously. You do your get here. Assume that this is already there. It will wait. This get will just, it'll wait for you. It has a default, I think it's like 10 seconds default timeout, which you can adjust, by the way. In fact, if we look at sci.get, again, let's look at our get. Well, there's documentation. You can provide options to a get, and those options can include a timeout. How long to wait in your sci.get? 5 seconds, 2 seconds. Now, this you tune this. You'd say, well, 5 seconds is long enough. I think the default is 5 or 10. I can't quite remember, but it's plenty of time. So for our purposes, we don't even need to wait for anything to happen or tell it to wait with some kind of asynchronous command. We could certainly add a wait command. In fact, let's take a look and see what Cypress says about that. Can we wait for things in Cypress? Wait. There is a wait command. And okay, so wait for something to resolve. A lot of ways how to do a wait. Wait for some milliseconds. Simply wait. Pause for a specific number of milliseconds. 2,002 seconds. Okay. It does say, though, using this wait, this particular form of waiting a specific time, this should be discouraged. You should not put in wait time. I think they mentioned this a little farther on down. Let's take a look. Yes, anti-pattern. You should almost never need to wait for this. Try not to do this kind of a wait. We could, but you shouldn't. It's last resort, and you almost never have to do it. Okay, there's other ways to achieve the same result. So try not to do this. But wait has another couple interesting things. What we can do is we can make aliases and wait for an alias to finish. For instance, we can say, wait for this visit to finish. We'll do this in the next exercise after the break, okay? But for asynchronous, for our purposes, this visit, this sci.get will simply wait for it to appear. If it doesn't appear on the screen after a certain time, it'll just assert. Okay, let's take a 10-minute break, come back, and we'll dig into a few more things. All right, welcome back, everyone. Let's carry on with part 2 of our discussion. So when we left, we talked about being able to interact with components in the application. Let's expand on that. We're going to do a couple more test. We're going to interact with some more components. There's not much on the screen, isn't there? It's got the checkbox. It's got this input here. And if I type stuff, for example, type in Queen, old rocker band. Everyone loves Queen. There. And it should find something related to Queen or some other group. Okay. Okay. I think my cultural experience froze in the 90s, I think. Okay. So if I type something in here, it shows stuff. The fact that I can type something in here, that tells me something. I should be able to type stuff in the input, shouldn't I? And if I type stuff, maybe slowly, depending how slow I type, it may or may not search. So I want to even test, can I actually enter text into this input field? That sounds like a great test. Let's go ahead and test that. Let's make some tests for the input field itself and how we would go about entering text into an input field. It's something we do a lot. Now, remember from Jest and testing library, how to get stuff into an input? That was kind of hard, wasn't it? We had to kind of the event.target.value thing in reverse to get event.target.value and then push that into the input. It was kind of hard, wasn't it? Well, let's see how Cypress does that for us. Let's just grab this, make a new file. We'll call this just typing. We'll call it number 3. We'll call it typing. Is there an E in typing? I don't think so. Dot spec dot JS. Okay. Let's take this test. And we'll leave this. That was kind of handy that before each. We'll leave that there because I kind of like that thing. There. So we're going to do a visit before each. Okay. And then we'll call this test for the input field. This is our suite of tests. And we'll just say, really, we can just type something in. So our test is going to be can type into the search input. I do encourage people, make very descriptive search names, please. You may have 1,000 of these tests, and the next morning when these things run automatically, you'll get a report of which ones didn't pass. And if your test just said, does stuff, and that's the one that failed, it's like, oh, the does stuff test failed. Which one was that? You don't know. So try to give them some reasonably descriptive text here when you write your tests. Okay, can type text into the search input. Okay, so looks like I have to do a visit, which is great. Now I have to find this input. Well, it turns out we've done this already, haven't we? A couple ways we can do it. Let's do something a little different. We can do it, we know, during an input. Let's do something we'll find by class. We haven't done that yet. So we'll do another DOM thing. Find this. Let's do an inspect on this. Let's take a look at it. As you know, there's lots of different ways you can find things in the DOM. So this is an input, has a class of radius. So maybe I'll find an input with class of radius, perhaps. Yeah. Maybe it's inside a form. Yeah, I'm going to find an input that's inside a form. That's pretty specific. So, because there's nothing else inside that form except that input. So I'm going to find a form with a class of search form. This is overkill to be sure. We're just doing this for demonstration purposes. I'm going to find a form with a class of search form. And inside that, I'm going to find an input with a class of radius. Real specific search. Okay. Let's try to find this. So we're going to find using our sci.get. Okay. Let's find a form there. And we said class of what? We said class of search underscore form. Okay. Although I'm pretty sure form is enough, honestly, but not, why not? Dot, because it's a class, search underscore was a form. I have no memory at all, don't I? form, and stop there. Did that work? Now we've got to go to Cypress because it's a new test. Need to open that one. And because I'm running on a very slow connection, in fact, I'm running off of my phone. See this? This is my internet. Actually, it's Wi-Fi. It's not as bad as it sounds. I'm not using data, thank goodness. But my laptop, for some reason, because I am staying in this airport hotel on the runway, my laptop doesn't pick up the Wi-Fi. No idea, but my phone does, so I'm working great. Okay, it looks like I'm working fine. It found a form with a class of search form. Okay. And then I want to, inside of that, find the input. Now there's only one input, so I could just say find input or input class radius. Let's be overkill for now. We're going to go dot find input, which we know is enough. We'll go radius just because we feel like adding some more stuff for fun here. So find an input with a class of radius. This is just CSS selectors, isn't it? We all know this from jQuery. Okay. Did it find that? Okay. Looks like it did. Got the form, and it's hard to tell the difference, but it did find, it does change slightly as I go to here. So it found an input. Okay. Now I want to type into that input. And who wants to guess what command we use to type or what action we use for typing? We all know the code by now, of course. Yes, it's type, of course. It's type. Take a look. How do we type? Type. And type is a very commonly used one you will always use. Type text. Yeah, dot type. This must be chained after another thing. It doesn't stand on its own. So you do a get and then a type. In fact, they show you incorrect usage. You can't go sci.type. It doesn't stand on its own. It must be chained after something else. So sci.get dot type, which is what we're doing here. Let's try that. So dot type. There. Now we're going to enter, let's go Bee Gees. I think I've got that song stuck in my head. I don't know why. Never liked the song anyways, but anybody got that Staying Alive? It's like it gets stuck in your head. Okay. All right. So we'll type in Bee Gees. Yes. Is it back to the 70s? That was 80s? The 80s? 70s. I think that was like late 70s, wasn't it? Wow. Okay. Go to my test. Let's take a look at my test. There it is. Find the input, and does it type? It does. It types Bee Gees. It typed it pretty fast. Let's do it again. Let's watch that happen again. Let's go. Here we go. We're going to do our test. Visit the page, and that was pretty fast. Okay. You can control the speed at which it types. Because as we know, this particular app actually waits in between keystrokes. You see, it waits about, I don't know, maybe a second and a half before it starts searching. Well, we want to know, how does this app behave when people type at certain speeds? Types fast, types slow, and what happens? Now, we're not going to do an exhaustive test, but let's demonstrate that we can, in fact, type at a different speed. Let's go to our type, and the second usage is options. Almost all the actions in Cypress take an options object after them, optionally. And we can give it options, such as there. So delay, animation, distance, threshold. What does that mean? Wow. Okay. That sounds very cool. I'll use that one today. We'll use delay. Force is interesting. You can actually force a type into an input, which is pretty cool. Commonly not used. But delay, in other words, slow down the typing. And that's what I want to do. Okay. So I'm going to give it an option delay. So an object with a delay of, let's go 250 or 350, very slow typing, like my kind of typing. Okay, back to my test. How's it going to look? Okay, now I should type a lot slower. Yeah, that's kind of like my typing. We can control the speed. Okay, Let's do something else. Why don't we test if we can make a correction? If we type, are we able to backspace? Does the backspace key work when we type something? So if we misspell something, we put maybe 3 E's. Yeah, there we go. There. Or 4, we can type backspace and a backspace works. Does the backspace, or does it assert when you try to type a backspace? So we can backspace as well. We can pretend you type something and backspace. We can really simulate a user's actions in great detail. Okay, so in the type, it says we can send special keys such as curly brace backspace. And that's what we'll do. We're going to go ahead and simulate the user pressing a special key. And all kinds of keys, the delete key, the alt key, the enter key, up, down, all kinds of things. You can simulate users pressing all kinds of keys in your app. Now, these things you can't do in Jest, can you? There's no way. This is stuff we could not do using a Jest test. But this is now a user interface. We can simulate all kinds of things in our test. We're going to go give it a couple extra E's here, and we'll put our a backspace in there. Make sure backspace, we'll do 2 backspaces. There, get rid of those 2 E's and then continue. Let's watch our test do this exercise. There we go. E, E, E. Oh, there, now the second test runs again. And there's our, that 1, 2, 3, 4, backspace, backspace. Hey, it's all working. Okay, it is a little slow, isn't it? It's kind of annoying, but we'll leave it like this for now. Okay. Okay, so we can simulate typing. Now you also may notice something else. This also doesn't look very dry, does it? I'm doing this every time. Now I may have a whole bunch of tests that I'm performing on this. And as you can tell, I'm doing a lot of really fussy tests. I can go all day doing this. Like, what if they press an Alt key at the wrong time? Does it change the focus? What happens if they press a Shift key? Does it do something else? Weird things can happen in apps. We need to test all this stuff. How is this input field going to behave if they press on the Alt key by mistake and do something else? What happens? So I could have 50 of these crazy tests for my input field. And each one of them, I have to do this get and find. So I probably should take this and put that in my before each, shouldn't I? Let's take that right there. Take that and we'll put it here, there. And we'll save that. Now I'm finding the input. What do I do here? Can I do a sci.type? We know we can't, can we? Because Cypress told us, no, you can't do that. You can't say sci.type. It must be chained after a get or something similar. We have to chain it after something. So what am I going to do? What am I going to chain it off? I can't just say sci.type. I'm getting it, but now what do I use? Okay. Well, what we do is we use what are called aliases. And these are used a lot in Cypress. Aliases, we save this. This get, we save it as an alias. So we say dot as, and we give it a name. I'll call this, I don't know, input field. There. I've saved that get as input field, as the alias. How do I use an alias? Well, a number of different ways, but if it's a get alias, I can simply use a get. This is going to be not a sci.type. It's going to be a sci.get. And I want to get that alias, don't I? Oops. Input field. There. But this might not work. What do you think? This is a CSS selector, isn't it? What am I telling my get to do? If I do this, if I just say input field, it's going to look for this, isn't it? It's going to look for pointy bracket in put field in my DOM, isn't it? We don't, because this is a CSS selector. So this won't work. Now, it's not a class. I could go dot input field, but it's not a class of input field. I can't go pound input field. So what Cypress did, they had to decide on some other character to use to identify this as an alias. And what they chose was at input field. A at alias, I think it works. Okay. So at input field. This is really common. This is something we do an awful lot of in Cypress testing. We make aliases all the time. So get the input field there and then type into it. And same with this. Get the input field and then type. Let's verify this works. Back to my test. There we go. It is in fact working with its annoyingly slow typing and even more annoyingly misspelling of BGs, which is incredible someone would do that, right? Everyone knows the BGs, don't they? Yes, of course. Okay, very cool. So we can type into an input field and we can use aliases. Okay, aliases, I mentioned, are they're used everywhere. And they just make sure we don't have to test, because what happens if maybe this particular input changed class a bit? We had 50 tests. We only want to change it one place like this. Okay. Let's do something else. Let's talk about being able to interact with APIs and fetch data, because we've kind of tested a little bit of the user interface. Let's find out this thing is actually doing what it's supposed to do. So if I type in Queen, I get something showing. In fact, it looks like I do get little spinner there as well. Let's take a look. What happens if I type in O? Oh yeah, the spinner shows. I want to test for that thing too. Can I see a spinner if somebody types something in? A spinner should show after a second or so if they type. Let's go ahead and test this. Let's make ourselves another integration file or a spec file here. We'll call this API. API dot spec.js. There. Okay, we'll grab our stuff because a little bit easier. There it is. There we go. We don't need, well, maybe we'll use that. I think I'll keep this because I want to type stuff in. Let's remove this one. Okay. Okay, so we'll start off with a similar test. Before we're going to visit the site, we're going to grab the input. Great start. And then we're going to type, that's slow. I'm going to go a lot faster than that. Let's go 150. A much faster typist. Someone faster than me. Okay, let's close this test and open up. We should now see a new test in our Cypress console. There it is. And we'll open that test, which is very slow to start, apparently. Okay, and it's going to just type in, let's type something else. There, let's type in Queen. Okay. There we go, types in Queen. See the spinner? Yep, spinner's there. Okay, that works. So I want to test is, when I test this, I want to see, does the spinner show if they type something? It should show after some delay. So I've got my typing here. I'm going to say can display spinner after typing. And these are tests for data fetching. Tests for data fetching. Does it show the spinner after someone types something? Okay, let's take a look. Okay, so we'll go to my test here. There. There we go. So there's my type. There's that. Okay, so I'm going to grab that. See, nice thing is I can show the request response before and after. Isn't that cool? You can actually show before the request and after the request response. And during the request, the spinner was showing. So I can actually right click on that. This is a live browser, and I can inspect that thing live inside my Electron browser. It's a little slower. It's not the best inspector. It does work. Here we go. Okay, so that was kind of hard to see. It says image with a class of spinner. Okay, so that's what's displaying it. Image with a class of spinner should be visible after someone types. That's kind of my test. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this. So I should be able to get something with a class of spinner. So sci.get dot get, I'll just say dot spinner. There. Okay, so when someone types, it should show a spinner at some point. Okay, back to our test. My test passed. It did find the spinner. Okay, so that's great. So that's the first test. Let's test that we can fetch some data. So now we have a bit of a problem because although I'm pretty sure I'm going to get this, but I know that a year ago when I typed in Queen, I got a much different result from iTunes from this. I got, yeah, Adam Lambert, I got him as well. Don't know why. But I didn't get, this is the first search. It was farther on down. It was in a different place. And some of these weren't even there. I guess iTunes just noticed Queen was a thing and they added Queen recently. Go figure. So I might not get the same result. And it's also going to an outside server. This is going to iTunes. And now my tests depend on iTunes being up. That's not a good idea, is it? First off, I shouldn't depend on some outside server, certainly one I don't control. And secondly, even that depends on outside or things outside of my test. And we try to control as many things in our test as we can. Or we get what are called flaky tests, tests that work sometimes and don't work other times because they have outside or external dependencies that are not reliable. So although I'm pretty sure I'm going to get these next time I do a Queen search, it's not really a good thing to assume that for a test I want to keep around for a couple of years, for instance, and go back and test it later. I need to control it, which means we need to fix the data. Make sure it doesn't change. It's called to fix, or to use fixture data, data that is fixed. That's called fixture or fixtures. Okay, so look at this here. Turns out this is actually pretty easy. Remember we did this? Any remember we did this in the compass work? We have this using mocks for X. Remember that? We used mocks in some of the work, how to mock out some data. This is a very similar concept. We're going to mock the data, but it's way easier. It's way, way easier. And I'll show you how. So first off, we need a file. I need to get a file that contains this data. I happen to have one. And that data, by the way, goes here in this directory that Cypress made for you called fixtures. It gave us an example one. We're not going to use this one. This is some example. I'll delete that one. There's no point having that one. Let's delete that. It's a sample file. I'm going to give it some fixture iTunes. And I happen to have one. Let's grab right there. Got that file. There. Okay, I've got some fixture data. This is fixed. It's from the artist Daft Punk that I totally know who that is, I think. Okay. Yeah, Daft Punk. Yes. They're a disco band, right? I get it from the name. Any Daft Punk fans in the audience? Anyone else know who Daft Punk is? Don't know. It's what I got. Okay. So, all right. This is my fixture data. So I want to have my fetch one more time. Okay, yeah. So when I do a search, I want to come up with fixture data. In other words, it's going to render my Daft Punk data in an API search. And if I look at what my application is doing, let's actually take a look here. Let's go to our network tab and we'll do a search. We'll type for Queen again. It does a fetch. There we go. It does a get. There it is. Let's look for XHR. This means AJAX calls only. So it made an AJAX call, a get to iTunesapple.com, and the search term was Queen. So it did this search question mark term equals Queen. So it made a query like this, and it got back some data. Well, I want to have my app not do that and instead use my fixture data. But remember, I don't have access to the source code. I can't alter anything in this code. This app may be running on a different machine altogether, maybe on a server someplace. So I can't touch the code. But I still want to have this API call here go to or use my fixture data. So this is a bit different. I want to, in a sense, intercept the AJAX call. That's what I really want to do. I want to intercept the AJAX call, and instead of fetching what iTunes gives me, inject my file. Okay, let's take a look. So first off, let's go ahead and do this. Let's go to our test file, which is being hidden right now. There it is. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to intercept a call. Let's go to Cypress. Intercept. I love that term. Sounds kind of Top Gun, doesn't it? Intercept. I wouldn't make it because I can't even spell intercept. Okay, intercept. Intercept requests. What do we do? Okay, rewrite networking, sure. Okay, spy and stub network request and response. In other words, provide mock data for a request. And here's how you, so you can just look at them only, or you can do stuff with it. Okay, and you can give it responses. A lot of things you can do. This one is the one we'll use. We're going to say intercept a get response on a particular URL and then give it a R response that we wanted to respond with. And some examples. You can intercept there. Intercept if someone goes /users, send them that instead. There, that works. So lots of interesting things we can do with intercepts. We'll use the simplest form because it's all I really need. So I'm going to do a sci dot intercept that term. Okay, and I want to intercept now. Let's look at my app. It was a get. So to be safe, I'm going to make sure I intercept only gets. So intercept a get there. Then it said the next parameter was give it the URL. Okay, well, this one in my app, it looks like it was, where's my, there it is. So contained search or base URL, then /search term equals. So I'm going to use that. It turns out you can do pattern matching. So it says search term equals, and then a whole bunch of stuff that I don't care about. So I'm going to give it a string here. Here's my get. I'm going to say there, intercept the following thing. Anything that starts with, so 2 stars means match anything, /search. Now that's kind of it. I can go question mark, I suppose, but really, and anything after that. I'll make a question mark, feel more specific. There. So if you see anything /search anything, intercept that call and replace it with something else. And I'm replacing that here. So search question mark anything. Okay. Replace it with what? Well, I'm going to replace it with a fixture file, fixture, and the file is called itunes.json, the file I have in my. So a fixture file, itunes.json right here. So that's kind of what I'm doing. I've told it to intercept any get, AJAX or otherwise, that has the string /search question mark in it, and replace whatever it responds with this. Okay. See what happens. It's gonna, what's my test gonna do now? So now, look at my test. Okay. Types in queen, and that ain't queen. So That is certainly not queen. So it looks like my test is working. Let's run it again to be sure. Go. Okay, types in queen, and certainly not queen, is it? Okay, so my fix is working. This is great. I've now fixed my data. Now I can now do tests based on my data being in a very specific state that will never change on me. Let's go ahead and do a nice bigger test. Okay, let's one more test. We'll make it a slightly larger test here. It'll be kind of a real end-to-end test. There we go. So we're going to say we can fetch items. So can fetch from API. There. Now we know it doesn't matter what we type, but I'll put it in here anyways. Daft punk to make it look like it's doing something. Okay, daft punk here. And by the way, I didn't have to put this intercept here. I could have put it in here and not put it in the before each, couldn't I? I might want to use a different data set, but I'm using it for everything now, so I'll have them both just for fun. Okay, I should get the spinner. If I don't, it will assert. Let's carry on. Okay, so now I should get my content. Let's find out what my content looks like. Let's go to my inspector. What have I got here? So I've got this thing called main that has a search section and then a filter section and then all these albums. They're all articles. You do have to know a little bit about the DOM to do these tests. Not a lot. You don't have to be an expert, but just enough to be able to find stuff in the DOM. So it looks like I have to find these articles. There we go. With a class equals album. Okay. So that's my get. I'm going to get articles with a class of album. Right. So do a sci.get here. Sci.get articles with a class dot album, just like that. Okay, let's take a look. I should probably do my only too. I'll do it only on this test later. Okay, so now it's going to get all the articles. Daft Punk. If you speed it up too. Okay, test all passed. And there's my get. Yes, it did in fact highlight or fetch all the articles of type album. Let's speed. Let's take 150. Let's just do an only. Yeah. Let's do a dot only to speed things up a bit. Okay, so we did get all of our articles. We want to find an article that contains something. And I know this one has random access memories. I know it well. Those nights on the hill playing random access memories. Yes. No. Okay, so my get should contain, I can do an assertion on this. I can say it should. There, I'll do a self-asserting one. I'll say, there, I'll find something that contains the string random access memories. Let's double check back to my, there, that article has, there we go. Oh, that's my input. There's my article. It's a div and div. Hold on. There we go. Oh, this. Oh, okay. Same thing. So it's going to be a div. There is my album that contains. So it looks like it's going to contain. Of course, this is my queen one, but it's going to have content, and the content will be the name of the album. So I'm going to say contains. So get all the articles and find the one that contains random access memories. That's my test. Okay, let's take a look. Does it find one that contains random access memories? It does. And it found that one. It's kind of hard to see. It's at the top right there. It's kind of hard. It pops top again. You can see it flashing back and forth. Let's click on there. There we go. And it's right up there. It found it. It's a self-asserting test, no further assertion needed. If it didn't find it, it wouldn't be there. My test would fail. Okay. One more thing. Let's go ahead and see if we can filter. If we check the explicit box there, it should filter. I think one of these is in red. It contains explicit lyrics. I can filter that out. So if someone clicks on this box, does it in fact go away? Okay. So I want to be able to determine. Okay, let's go in my here. There. So let's find out if someone checks the checkbox, does it disappear? All right. So I want to get that explicit. So once again, we'll do a sci.get. Sci.get. Now we know that each one of those checkboxes had a class, pound, and this one had a class of explicit. There. Let's stop there and watch what our test does. Did that fetch our checkbox? Okay, there it is. And yep, it is selected. There we go. And it did select my checkbox. Okay, and I want to uncheck that checkbox. So dot uncheck. There. We know this works. Okay. There's our uncheck before and after, and there we go. Okay. So now these articles should not contain the one that was removed. And that one was, let's double check, Daft Club. Yes, good old Daft Club. Okay. It should not contain. So I'll do my sci.dot articles again. Same thing. Now you may ask yourself, wait a second, didn't you do a sci.get on album articles before? Why not just do this? Why not go const your search equals that? And then just use that. This doesn't work like you expect it to behave. And in fact, Cypress mentions that. Don't do this. Try not to make variables and reuse them. I learned this the hard way. It does not work. It has very unpredictable behavior. So you wouldn't do this. You would do the sci.get again. It's not that expensive. Compared to the rendering on the browser, it's really cheap. Okay. So now it should, okay, we're going to give it an assertion. We're going to say this there. We'll say dot should there. And we're going to say not dot contain, comma. This is now an assertion. It's a should assertion. It should not contain Daft Club. There. And there's our complete test. And this is a pretty good end-to-end test. We're doing a number of things. We fetch data and filter out the explicit. Take a look at our final test. And our test passed. There we go. And at the end, it didn't contain Daft Club. That's a complete end-to-end test, right? So this is what we normally do with an API fetch. We'd use fixture data. Now we could certainly do a wait. If it was a more complex intercept, we can actually save this there as an alias. We can give this intercept an alias if you really want to do that. And actually, I commonly do, by the way. I almost always alias my intercepts. I can call this, I'll just call this API. There, fetch your iTunes, fetch, it doesn't matter, iTunes, fetch or search, there. Now it's aliased. What you can do, if you want more control over your AJAX calls, you can wait for this fetch or intercept to complete. So here, I would say, here, I can go my wait. I can wait for my intercept to finish. Sci.dot wait. Now we know waiting a delay, like a sci.dot wait this way, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. We can, but you can wait for an alias. We can wait for our alias at our iTunes fetch to finish. There. Let's watch what happens. There. There. Okay. So now there's our wait, and it waited for our iTunes fetch to complete. Okay. I commonly do this, by the way, when I'm doing a lot of API calls. I almost always put an alias and a wait. Okay. So that's using interactive Cypress. As you can see, it's a pretty cool environment, isn't it? You can really see what's going on. It is just so easy to use. It shows you every step of the way what your tests are doing. No more stuff dumping on the console and confusing us. It's just all there. And you can highlight every step of your test that it did. It's so handy. Okay. One more fun thing about Cypress before we go. 1 minute left to go. This is the interactive mode. This is what we use to develop tests in. But this is not the way we run our tests. We don't run them this way. Everything these days is about automation, isn't it? And automated testing, or what's oftentimes called continuous integration. That concept of developer, push their code, triggers some tests, triggers a build, triggers the end-to-end tests, and triggers a deploy. Ends up on the website. All from the developer going push. And after that, it's all automated. Okay, and that's what happens. You do a push, it will go through a number of steps, run some tests, and maybe you get an email right away saying 4 tests failed. Oh, wow. You broke the build. Remember rule number 1 of using Git and GitHub? The first rule of GitHub is don't break the build. And then second rule is don't hook up a GitHub. But yeah, the first rule of GitHub is, or Git, don't break the master build. When you push master, it's going to trigger off a sequence of events that will do tests, that will do all kinds of stuff, and you'll be notified your master broke, and it actually didn't accept your push. It froze it, it became a pull request. You got to clean that up. So this is what happens. So Cypress is no exception. It can run in automated mode as well. Let's take a look at that. So let's go ahead. I'm going to put my console here. I can stop that one, and there it is. So now I've stopped Cypress. There. So there is a way to have Cypress also run in interactive mode. There's a couple of ways to do it. Let's take a look. There. Cypress. Let's look for Cypress run CLI. There. Or non-interactive command line. What do we do? Remember, Google is our friend. We check for everything in Google. Cypress.run. Okay, interesting. So it looks like it's just Cypress.run. We'll run our tests on the command line. So npm and then Cypress run. Let's give that a try. Okay, there's other ones as well, but this is runs them what's called headless with no head. Sounds kind of weird. It means no browser. So to run headlessly means to run with no UI. So Cypress run. Okay, let's make ourselves a test. So we have our package.json here. There. Let's make ourselves another one. We'll call it test. I know we should reserve that for a jest, but I'm going to be lazy today. So Cypress res run, and let's watch what happens if our tests run headless. Okay, let's go to our command line and npm. Let's watch what happens. I'm kind of curious. Okay. It does take a while to spin up because it still has to construct in memory a whole browser. It has to instantiate a browser and test running. Here we go. There's our first spec. It's running now. Let's watch it run. Oops, there. Running our first spec. Okay. Now it's got the browser going. Now we can start running our tests. Is it running? It is running a lot slower because I'm using my phone for network. So far, two passing. Okay, what's that doing? What? Making a video? That's kind of cool. Let's take a look at that later. It creates a video of the test. Now that is awesome, isn't it? No need to guess. It will show you what test failed, and it gives you a video of the test failing or the test completing as well. By the way, you can disable a video because, as you can imagine, it does take a bit of processing time to create the video. That one passed. Look at that, 9 seconds. That's a lot slower than Jest, isn't it? These are definitely slower. Now, I'm running on a laptop with questionable internet, so it's not quite this slow, but they're certainly slower than Jest tests. We're getting there. It's almost done. It's kind of slow, isn't it? Input field. This is the annoying slow typing, right? Slowly typing, backspace, backspace. So yeah, 10 seconds, 7 seconds. They all passed. Okay. One more API, and we're almost done. So this is not something you'd run as part of the general development. This would only be run in our final step as the last step before deployment. This would not be run in our normal CI cycle where we push, because I push often. And if I'm pushing faster than this thing can do tests on, it's going to backlog, isn't it? So we don't oftentimes run integration tests as part of development, ongoing development. We run our Jest tests then. This is done usually after our development is complete. Okay, data fetching almost all done. One failed. That can happen sometimes. I've got my weight set kind of funny in this one. It's not a big deal. Okay, and let's take a look at our Cypress. Let's go back to I think they're still here now. Now you notice in my Cypress directory, it made a new folder called videos right here. And how's my test doing? Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so it did find my test, ran them, and it made some video of my test. Let's view one video just for fun. Let's view the typing spec because that was annoyingly slow. How does our test look like? We come back the next morning. What happened in the test? Click play. And there's the test running. There. And pulls the browser up, starts typing, the usual stuff. So exactly what we expect to see if we had done it with the console. Okay, but these are all saved now. And the next morning in our project, these will appear. These actually get committed to our project. Next time you do a pull, these files will appear in your Git repository. It's pretty cool stuff. Right. All right, everyone, that's our talk today on end-to-end Cypress. As you can see, it's kind of fun. It really is like playing a video game with all this fun stuff. It's great fun. Cypress is a great tool. And by the way, anyone wants to wonder, it is free. They give it away. There is no charge. It's like Linux. Their hope is that enough people use it, it takes on a life of its own, just like Linux did. And as it turns out, they were correct. Cypress is hugely popular now in the industry. It's a very, very popular testing framework. Chances are where you work, they'll have heard of it. If they haven't, you should suggest it for end-to-end testing. All right, everyone. I'll let everyone go. Have a great rest of your Saturday, and thank you for coming for our talk on end-to-end testing.